Let me just answer that and then see. Okay. So when you're actually writing DBMS output dot put underscore line, so where will you find that package? See, as I said, DBMS output is an API which comes with a PLSQL or an Oracle database. So which will be predefined and it will be compiled when you're actually installing the Oracle database itself. So if you want to know that API, whether it exists in the PLSQL or your Oracle database, so what you have to do is just let's say I have the connections and let me just log into my SQL developer. So any API that you want to access within the Oracle, so all the APIs you can do that. So just you need to type the package name. This is called as a package. So these are all the objects which are owned by your sys user. When I say sys user, by default, whenever you install Oracle database, few user accounts will get created. Sys, system, and HR, Scott. These are all the different schemas which gets created, and the sys user owns all the default system related objects like dual table and the other thing. Let's say if I want to know about this API, DBMS output is the actual API dot put underscore, put underscore line is a method which is part of this package. So if I want to know about this one, so let's say you just right click on it and then there is an option called as describe. Okay. Open declaration, pop-up describe. So just use pop-up describe option. It will open up the package. So inside this package you'll have that enable, and then the disable is another procedure. Put underscore line is another procedure which you have. So what it is being written, put a piece of information in the buffer followed by the end of line maker. Means whenever you want to print some message, then you're going to use a put underscore line. So likewise, these are all the, when you say put underscore line, that is the method which is a part of DBMS output package. So whoever has a access to the DBMS output package, you can basically write, use this information and then print it on the console. So likewise, you have a n number of packages in PLSQL. So which are like a inbuilt library for the PLSQL. In the sense, let's say if you have idea about the C language, whenever you're writing a C program, you'll write on the top hash include io.sh or math.sh, math.io and all those things. Like basically what do you do by doing that is, you're actually making use of the library which is already available in the PLSQL. So that's something which you have to think about. Like this is like an API or a PLSQL library which is available for using it to use in your programs. That's it. So that's called as a DBMS output. So whenever you want to know about anything, let's say there is another package called as a UTL underscore file. So this is another package which is used for file operations and all those things. This is a part of a library. So if you just want to know about it, just right click on it and pop up describe. So these are all the different methods and functions and procedures. Basically still we didn't talk about what is a procedure and all. So at this point of time, this might be a new term that if I use, basically you'll eventually come to know by when the training progresses. Right. So see, if you think about the things that we have actually had a discussion in the last week in the PLSQL part, is that we understand about what is an anonymous block. I'm just repeating it. So to just refresh you in case if you have missed the class or in case if you have not practiced. So what is an anonymous block? And next one is about we have seen how to declare the variables, in PLSQL. And the third one is you also checked the how to declare the variables, and then we also seen different uses of different control structures, and we have written simple programs and I've also shown you different control structures, and I've also shown you the how to practice all the hands-on in the provided document, right? So different control structures which we have, and the another thing is about the uh, we have seen the different control structures, and in the today's class we are going to talk about the exceptions. See, basically when we talked about the program, when we talked about the PLSQL program, so that the PLSQL program is actually consists of three blocks. One is called as a declaration section, and another is called as a execution section, and within the begin and end whatever you write, so that becomes your execution block which will be there. So declaration and then the execution block which it is there. So when you take a look at this one, let's say exception block is a part of your execution block, which is an optional one. So what are the mandatory blocks in this? One is a execution block is mandatory, exception is optional, and declaration is an optional section what you have in a program. So basically whenever you're writing a PLSQL program, so best practice is that without the exception you should not write it. You should not write at all a program, because in the runtime whenever it gives a error message, it should throw a proper error message. So to the anybody who looks at the program or somebody who executes a program, it should throw the meaningful error message. So it should not throw the complex technical error messages and all those things. Exception is nothing but a predefined or Oracle server error. So when you're executing a program, if your program results in an error, and that is called as an exception. So let's say simple example would be so before this we also talked about the cursors. So what is a cursors and all those, okay? So when we talk about the exception block, exception, how it will be, let's say you're actually dividing the numbers, and in one of your in the program you encountered the statement something like 1 by 0 condition. So 1 divided by 0 or any number by 0 which is an invalid thing or it's an infinite, you basically cannot do that. It cannot be defined. It's an undefined. So these kind of predefined exceptions if you have, so then how to handle them? So basically the exceptions, when you talk about the exceptions are two types. So one is called as a predefined exceptions, and another is called as a user-defined exceptions. So when you take a look at these things, predefined exceptions means which Oracle itself will throw the error message, and user-defined exception means, let's say as a user, as a programmer, you want to raise an exception inside your program. That can be done by the user-defined exception. So we'll see both of them now. How can we handle the exception and how to do that? So before actually stepping into that, I would like to introduce you to the one more type of a cursor that we use, that is an implicit cursor, which we use here. Let's say I want to print I will pass the employee ID and the employee ID. So I just want to print the employee name. So that is my program which I'm writing. Let's say 100 is the employee ID. I need to fetch the employee name of this guy. Let's say the last name and first name concatenation, which I want to do it. So let's say varchar 2 of 100, and here we are going to talk about the select into clause. It's a kind of a cursor only which can fetch only one row. So if you have to fetch only one row, let's say I want to concatenate the last name concatenated with first name, last name concatenated with first name. Let's say so when you concatenate this one, I just want to call this as a full name. So this is like a normal SQL into, I want to fetch this value, whatever is concatenated, into the employee name. So this cursor, this is also another type of a cursor which we have seen, which when we talked about the cursor, I didn't actually talk about this. Let's say this is another type of cursor which we can use, that is called as a select into. So you can, this type of a cursor can fetch only one record at a time. So it's basically that it will fetch one record. Let's say if I want to print the employee name, so which you have it as DBMS underscore output dot put underscore line, let's say put underscore line, and if you want to print this, let's say print the employee name, so which is associated with it, so it's concatenated with v underscore employee name. So when you try to do this, so it's
employee ID variable is not correct.
Map to wrong variable.
Where clause?
Yeah, I modified it. Thank you. So when we say this, like v underscore employee ID is a number, employee name is this. So this is another type of implicit cursor which we use to fetch the attributes. So let's say if I want to run this and see how this works, let me use the connection, this one. Why? How can I minimize this? Okay, let's close this connection part. So now let's say you have this one. So let's try to execute the value and check. So now it should print the complete employee name of 100 in doing this. So let me type, and now it is actually printing for me the King and the Stephen. Anyway, I don't need it, but anyway, this script output is working fine for me. I'll just use this, and let me just start defining this itself. Okay, so this way, this type of a cursor is called as an implicit cursor. So it can handle only one, it can handle only one record, or it can fetch only one record at a time. So in case if you have to fetch the multiple records, or if you want to loop through the group of records, it's basically that you have to loop through that and then find it out. Let's say I know that 100 employee ID is existing in the employee table, so it was able to return the employee name for me. So let's make it as a dynamic one. Substitute the variable at the runtime. So let's say I call this as ampersand employee ID. So whenever I execute, it basically asks me to enter the employee ID. When I enter the employee ID as 100, so it's basically, it is printing me the message as King Stephen. That is a employee name. So what happens when I'm providing an employee ID? Let's say I'm providing an employee ID which does not exist in the employee table. I know that there is no employee who present in the employee table with 999. So what will happen when I run it? It throws the exception. So this is called as an exception. See, it's an error which is being thrown. When it is throwing the error, what it is saying is no data found. What does that mean? No data found is an exception. Basically, when it is trying to retrieve the data, saying that select last name from employees where employee ID is equal to 999, there is no record. So it is not able to capture the value into employee name column. That's why it is throwing the error. This is nothing but a exception. So this kind of an exception which Oracle server is already defined for you. So whenever there is a no data present, or whenever if the cursor returns more than one records, all these kind of an exceptions are called as a predefined exceptions. So we'll see now how to handle these predefined exceptions and how to handle the exceptions which you haven't thought about when you're writing a program. So how an exception section will help you to do that. So let's try to handle them now in using it. So even here, when you talk about an exception, there might be the new term that is being used here. An exception is nothing but a, when you are executing a program, it's an unexpected error that is called as an exception. So I have shown you now the one way of handling the exception. So let me just try to show you. Let's say now we'll take the same program. So what this program is doing, it's basically taking the employee ID as an example, and it is trying to fetch the employee name and it's printing it. So now what I want to do is, in case if an employee does not exist, I just want to print the message saying that, okay, so employee ID, employee with this employee ID does not exist in the employees table. So let me just try to do that. Okay, so now we have seen that there was a no data found exception. So whenever I executed my program, what happened? My program is abruptly stopped. It stopped the execution of the program. So from that line, from this line, it is directly jumped and it didn't even print what is the employee name. So how, see, whenever there is an exception, always your control will jump to the exception block. So if the exception is not there, then it will stop the program. If the exception is there, then it will go to the exception and then execute that exception block, whatever it is there. So I hope you are understanding. Let's say my program is being executed from top to bottom. I found the error, I found the exception in the 38th row. So when you found the exception, if there is a exception block which is there in your program, then it will start executing the exception block. If there is no exception block, then it will stop your program basically to do that. Let me write this exception. Let's say how to handle it. Whenever you want to handle a particular exception, you always have to write when exception name. You have to write the exception name. That exception name is nothing but here the no data found exception. So no data found. Whenever this exception is there, then what I want to do is I just want to print it. I'll show you how to raise the message as well. But for now, I just want to print in my message program saying that employee with employee ID. Let's say what is an employee ID value that you have is nothing but v underscore employee ID. So let's say I want to print saying does not exist. Does not exist. So this is what I want to print in using it. Let's say when you try to execute here, and employee ID is something employee ID is something, let's say if I enter 100 is an employee which is existing. So when I execute this program, it will just printing me saying that employee King Steven, because employee is already there and it is not moved to the exception block because employee is already present. Let's say if you are executing a program with an employee who does not exist. So what happens whenever a control rises? See, you didn't find this exception now. Let's say, did you find the no data found exception when you have written a program here? No, because the last time when you have executed a program, it was not having the exception block in your program. That's why it has stopped your program. But this is now, since you already have the exception block which is placed, then this is being handled and it is printing the message as employee with employee ID 888 does not exist in your employee table. That's what it is doing. So this is called as an exception block when you use it. So there are other type of exceptions as well. One is called as your predefined exceptions and another is a user defined exception. See, whenever you write or whenever you want to trap the exceptions, so the first thing is that you need to write all the exception 1, exception 2, exception 3 like that. At last you should keep when others. When others is for, suppose let's say if your program has thrown the exception other than all the above exceptions, then this will be handled. So when you are writing the exception block, always when others should come always last in the exception block. When others should come always last. So suppose let's say, let's try to write another program. Okay, so I want to fetch the employee details, not an employee details. So let's try to write the employee details. I want to fetch the salary of an employee. Let me just write a new program itself. So I'm writing a new program now. How to handle the multiple exceptions inside an exception block. So declare. Let's say I want to bring the salary based on the employee name. That is my program which I want to do it. So I have shown you the other way of declaring the variables. So that is your employees dot salary percentage type. You know that salary column is the is present in the employees table. So you can also define something like this when you are doing it. Let's say another one is, let's say I want to bring that based on the last name of an employee. So last name column is also employees table. So I can also define something like this. So which I can call it as last name percentage type. So when you use it, let's say begin and end, and I want to basically print the salary whenever I pass the last name column. Okay, so let me write the cursor. So here basically you can add the comments in your program, something like this, fetching the salary based on the last name of an employee, so which it is there. So let's say select salary from, or you want to calculate the total salary, so let's write it something like that, or annual salary. So I want to fetch the annual salary. So what do you mean by annual salary? It's nothing but salary divided by 12. So whenever the salary is null, I want to replace that null value with a default value as 0. So this is nothing but my annual salary. So I call this as an underscore sal from, let's say, employees. So I want to fetch this value into some temporary variable by using a into clause. So this is an implicit cursor I'm defining. So now so NVL of this, so from employees into the annual salary, I'll write something as where last name equal to, let's say last name equal to v underscore last name. I'm going to pass the last name to an employee. So let me just initialize this, so which I call it as ampersand last name. So ampersand of last name. So whenever, see, basically that whenever I pass the last name to this, if the employees who are having the same last name, this my query will return more than one row. If employees who is having a unique last name, then my query returns only one record. See what I'm trying to say, let's say if I execute the same query, I'm not executing the program, I'm just showing you the data how it works. Okay, so basically when you write it and do that, let's say if I pass the last name as a king, what happens? It returns more than one record, right? So you have two employees whose last name is king, so it is returning me two records. Suppose let's say I'm passing an employee name, what is that, Kocher. So if I pass the employee name as last name as Kocher, I think, let me just query 1 second, please. I want to know the select star from employees. Yes, so COCHHAR. So if I pass only this, it gives me only one record. I know that I'm confident that it gives me only one record. What happens if I pass a name which does not exist? It doesn't give me any record because there is no employee called as Karthik. So when you try and execute, it gives me no records. See, it depends upon the input that you pass. Your query will return multiple records. If I give the King as a last name, it returns me more than one record. If I give Kocher, it gives me only one record. If I pass the name which does not exist, it doesn't return me any other records. So I have to handle the different types of exception here. So how do you handle it? Let's say if there is a no data found exception, so I want to print this. Let's say whenever there is a no data found exception, I want to print saying that employee with the last name. So employee with last name. What is the name of an employee? So this is a name that you're actually passing. So just use does not exist. Okay, so it does not exist. So let's say if your query returns more than one rows, there is another exception called as too many rows exception. If a cursor is returning more than one row, then this type of an exception will occur. Let's say in this case, when you say that King, it is returning you more than one row. So in that case, your Oracle will raise the too many rows exception. So if there is a too many rows, then I want to print the message as employee more than one employee exists with the same last name. More than one employee exists with the same last name. So I want to write this last name more than one employee exists. So I just want to print this message. So what happens when I execute this anonymous block? Based on my last name, appropriate message will be executed. So in case if you get any other error message, let's say if you get any other exception other than all the above things, so then you can write it as when others. That means any other default exception. When others is a default execution block. So which means if none of the above executions or none of the above exceptions are true, then it will go to the this one. So DBMS output. So let's come back to this maybe in the next example. So let's say when I try to execute this, what happens is that it will ask me basically the last name. Now I'm entering the message as, let's say, Karthik. So what happens now when I enter the message as a Karthik? So basically there is no employee with the same name as Karthik. So it is displaying me the message as employee with last name Karthik does not exist. Basically this execution block, this has been executed. So what happens when I execute the same thing with the last name as King? So I'm entering the King as a last name of an employee. So when you try to execute, it basically gives you more than one employee exists with the last name King. So that is what it is printing me. So what I'm trying to say, you have to basically understand what type of exceptions can be raised by your program. All those exceptions should be handled. Otherwise, your program will be stopped abruptly and it result in an error. What happens now? Let's say I have an other way of how can I talk about other exception? Let's say if it is a no data found exception, this is getting executed. if there is a too many rows exception, this is getting executed. What happens if an Oracle program gives you the exception which you have not expected? So in that case, it will basically stop the execution of your program. So in order to avoid stop the execution of the program, whenever you write, by default always you should include a clause called as a when others then. So if you want to know, let's say, what is the error that you have got here, then you can write the message as there is something called as there is some serious error, so which you have to investigate. So now if you don't have when others block, what happens? It will stop your program. Let me just try to execute and see. Basically I'm just entering the king, so it has stopped it. Why? There is some compilation error which it is there, and it is started throwing the error. So the type of exception is incomplete or malformed. So this is something which it has thrown. This is an exception it has thrown. It started saying king must be declared. So that is an error which you are getting when I'm passing the king. So what is the difference is that last time I have passed the king in the single quotes. This time I haven't passed the string in the single quotes. When I have done that, it is basically understand that your string is not proper, and it has thrown the error accordingly. So that is an unhandled exception. So if you have such type of an errors when you execute, let me just show you again. When you try to execute, it basically throwing me the error as identifier king must be declared. So that is an error which I'm getting, even though it's a compilation error in fact. So let's say whenever you want to handle all the exceptions, always it's a good practice to keep when others then, and I want to print now the message as, let's say I want to print this message as when others, there is a serious error about your program. So now what it will do, in case of any other exceptions, it will go and print your when others block. See, whenever it is executing the when others block, you should basically know what error it is throwing, right? So what error it is throwing, that's why PLSQL will give you some pseudo columns which we call. First one is called as a SQL code. So this will give you the error code of your program. Another is your SQL ERRM. So this will give you the error message of, it will give you the Oracle error message. So whenever, if you want to print, in case of any other exceptions, if you print SQL code, it will give you the SQL Oracle error code. And if you want to print ERRM, it will print you the SQL ERRM. So let me just try to write the condition. So you can write it as, so you don't need to include them in the single quotes. If I write the program as SQL code, it will print me the SQL code what is written by my program, and SQL ERRM, it's basically which is used by SQL ERRM is another error message that which we have. So this is whenever you are handling anything in the when others block, you can always make use of the SQL code and SQL ERRM message. So you have to keep the exceptions something like this. First, all the examples always when others should come always in the last. You cannot, what happens if you keep when others first, then the no data found exception, then it's a compilation error. Basically you're actually, if the when others gets executed, then your control will not return back to the program. So that's the reason. So you always have to do that. So what are the predefined exceptions which you have? One is a no data found exception, invalid too many rows, invalid cursor, duplicate value on index. When do you get this kind of an exception? Is because whenever you're trying to insert a duplicate value into a primary key column or a unique column, then you'll get this error. Whenever you divide by 0, you'll get 0 divide exception. Whenever you're trying to access a cursor which is not present, basically you have not defined. which you have not defined, that kind of things. So you have lot of other exceptions which are there. So but at the high level, you just understand only these things: no data found, too many rows, invalid cursor, and all those exceptions which it is there. So always you have to raise the exception in using it. So let's try to write one program. So then only you'll actually come to know whether how this exception is actually working. Let's try to take one program from your practice solutions and write the program in it. So first one, let's say practices. Okay, there is a lot of dependency. Okay, in the declarative section, declare two variables: v employee name and then the v employee salary. Initialize the later to 6,000. Okay, it's handling predefined exception. Cannot delete department. Okay, we'll come back to this. I think there is some more thing which we have to understand and come to this. Okay, let me just also show you how to raise the user-defined exception. User-defined exception is something that, let's say, suppose you're passing you want to calculate the, you want to update the salary of the particular department employees, and assume that that employees are not existing, that employees are basically, that employee or that department is not existing in your employee table, and you want to raise the user defined exception. Then how do you do that? So this is your SQL code is returns the numerical value of error code, and SQL ERRM will return the error message associated with that error number. So let's try to add it now. How to make how can we capture the SQL code and SQL ERRM and the other way of handling it? Okay, so this here, for handling the user defined exception, we'll try to write one program. So if you see the earlier program, what we have actually done is we have calculated the, we have basically used the predefined exceptions like no data found and too many rows, and we have executed our program. So the next one is, let's say you call that as a, in this program what we are trying to do is, I'm actually trying to update the department name. I'm trying to update the department name. So when I pass the department, if the department does not exist, it has to throw me the error saying that, okay, there is no such department exists in your department table. If there is a department with that name, it basically has to update the name of a department. So here, the way the message that you are writing, or the message which you are throwing the error message to the business users, is that you have to throw the message saying that no such department. Let's say you have a interface, user interface, wherein user is entering the department and they're updating the name of that department. If the department name is not existing, user should know that, okay, there is no department, I'm not trying to, I cannot update that department. So such kind of error messages should be shown to the business user. So you cannot show the Oracle error message saying that, okay, no data found. So that cannot be shown. So whenever you want to show the meaningful error message to the user on the UI and all, then we go for a user defined exception. User defined exception is like a business validation. Suppose, let's say you are writing a program, you want to validate the SSN number of a particular customer. So let's say assume that SSN number should be of some 12 digits, and SSN number of a customer what you have received is less than 12 digits, and you want to throw the exception saying that, okay, your PAN card number or SSN number is less than 10 digits. Okay, so let's try to write that program. Otherwise we'll try to write a very simple program other than this. Okay, now basically I'm giving you the program is that you have to write a program and find out the length of the PAN card number, and if the PAN card number is less than 10 characters, less than or equal less than 10 characters, you want to raise the message saying that okay, this is an invalid PAN card. That is what you have to do it. So how do you do that? Let's say I use a declare, and this is an example for a user defined exception. So let me write it here. Example for user defined exception, which it is there. So let's try to write this one. Okay, so when you write it, I want to whenever you want to define a user defined exception, so which you call it as, you need to define the exception something like this. So v underscore, let's say exceptions are always starts with e underscore. So let's say if I want to invalid PAN is an exception which it is there. So use the exception which it is there. And let's say you have something called as a v underscore PAN card number. I want to v underscore PAN card num. So it is of varchar 2 of let's say 100. So this I am defining it to some number. Okay, otherwise we will pass at the runtime for a multiple inputs how it gets executed. Let's say I call this as ampersand PAN. So this way you use it. When you take a look at it, let's say I want to find out the length of the PAN card. If the length of the PAN card is less than 10, then I want to raise this message. So how do you do that? I'm using a if condition, and you have some other values as well. I mean, let's say here you want to add that PAN card number or update that PAN card number on the student table or something. Though you can write your own execution statements here. I'm not writing anything. I'm just trying to show you how this works. So what I want to do is, if the length of this PAN card number, basically if the length of this PAN card number is less than 10, then I want to raise the exception. So this is an end if block. So if the length of this is, then this is a keyword that you're going to use. Raise is a keyword to raise the user defined exception. What exception you want to raise? You want to raise the exception as e underscore invalid of this. So whenever such exception is there, you have to catch that exception and then print the error message. I mean, print the user defined message accordingly. Whenever you found this exception, I just want to print the message as okay, DBMS output dot put underscore line, DBMS output dot put underscore line. So let's say invalid PAN card number. So you want to write it as invalid PAN card number. So how you use it? So when you try to see this, let's say if it is not an invalid PAN card number, you have to print it saying that DBMS output dot put underscore line. Let's say it's a valid PAN card number. Whatever the valid PAN card number is, so you want to write this exception. I mean, you want to print this. Basically, you can print this value and then do it. So now how this program will be executed when you try to run it. So after invalid PAN card number, you can also always, as I said, it's always a good practice to keep in case if the program finds other than this error. So this has to be print. So you can use it as DBMS. I'll define this as something like, let's say 11 or let's say 10 digits only. Okay. It is less than 10, or I'll write another condition if it is less than 10 or more than 10. If it is less than 10 or more than 10 characters, then I want to print message as invalid PAN card number. So whenever DBMS output dot put underscore line, DBMS output dot put underscore line. Let's say here I want to print the SQL code and SQL ERRM. Let's see that what kind of error message that it prints for me. Directly I'm printing the SQL code and SQL ERRM messages. We'll see SQL ERRM. So I'll define this as something like maybe 12 characters, okay, because I have to show you a couple of things here. That's the reason I purposefully defined a PAN card number as a varchar2. So concentrate here. See, basically when I try to execute, if I am giving you the correct PAN card number, let's say which is of 10 characters, so ALBPR 8627A. So that is your my PAN card number. So when I try to do this, so this is basically printing me the message as a valid PAN card number. So look at your program. So you're basically defined and it is printing me the message as a valid PAN card number. So what happens when I execute the same program? Let me just reset this. Oops. I have to execute this block. Okay. So let me reset it. When I run the same program, let's say if I am entering something which is more than 10 digits, right? ALBPR 8627A, this is 10 digits and I am entering one more A. It's basically my input is greater than 10 characters. So it has to throw me an error saying that it is an invalid PAN card number. That means what has happened is when you have executed this, it is more than 10 characters. So it has raised this exception and it is jumped to, your control is jumped here and then it is print the message as a invalid PAN card number. So which means whenever this is true, then only your if block will get executed, isn't it? Otherwise your if block will never get executed. So that way you're able to capture this message that is invalid PAN card number. What happens if I enter the PAN card number which is more than 12 characters? So first what I have done, I have executed with 10 characters, so it has print me. And in order to test my user defined exception, I have actually passed the 11 characters, so it has print me the message. Now I'm passing the message which is more than 12 characters. Basically what error it throws, observe it. See here. It is actually throwing me the error as numeric or value error. Character string buffer is too small. Can somebody tell me what is this error? We have not actually captured this error in the program. Basically what is happening is that it is directly jumping into when others block and it is printing me the error message. I think it is not printing even the error message. Basically that it is just stopping here itself. When you're trying to assign the value, right? When you're trying to assign the value, that time itself, it is, you have actually defined this as a 12. But you're assigning the value which is more than 12 characters. Definitely this cannot be handled. This cannot handle that data. That's why it is stopping your program at that point. So this is called as a, let's say you unhandled exception. You have not handled that exception. It's basically throwing you the error. So let me, instead of assigning the value here, what I do is I'll just assign the value from here for a V PAN card number. V PAN card number. So here I'm going to assign the value as, let's say I'm hard coding the value, that's fine. So ALBPR 8627AAAA or whatever. So which is more than 12 characters. So when you try and execute this program, it's basically, it will give me the unhandled exception and it has to print me the error message SQL code and SQL ERRM. So how it prints now, let's try and check that. See here, anonymous block is completed and SQL code is 65002 and the complete SQL ERRM error message is numeric value error, character string buffer is too small. Earlier the exception is happened in the declaration section. Now the exception is is happening in the execution block. So whenever you have an execution block which is happening here, so your control will jump always to the exception block and handle the appropriate exception, or appropriate exception block will get executed. So this is called as a user defined exception. Basically, whenever you want to throw the exception based on the business validations, then you can write a program of something like this, and then that can be handled. So this is little important in terms of handling the exceptions and all those. So I hope you are good in understanding this. All right. So if you have any questions here before we proceed how to raise the exception, this is an example for a predefined exception. Predefined exception with the others clause, when others clause, and first one is about the predefined exception. So this is one example for predefined exception, and this is also an example for understanding the exception, like what do you mean by exception. So this is another understanding the exception what you use. So this is about the different kinds of exceptions that how you handle. Maybe once you write these programs and then do that, you'll be able to understand. Anyway, when you go to your practice 8, make sure that you practice it completely from end to end. Alright, so there is one more thing which you have to understand in the exceptions, is that raising the application error. So how do you raise the application error? See, the application error is nothing but whenever you want to throw a user defined error message, then you can raise this, you can use this raise application error method. So this is raise application error is a procedure to communicate the predefined exception interactively by returning the non-standard error code and non-standard error message. So it's basically, you don't want to throw the Oracle error to the business user. Basically, I want to throw some meaningful message. When you are using a raise application error method, this message will be thrown to the block which is calling your procedure, or it will be thrown to the interface which is calling your procedure. Maybe if you are invoking the procedure from the .NET or from the Java, so to Java you want to throw the error saying that okay, this is an invalid PAN card. So with a standard error code, not like an Oracle error code. So if you want to do that, then we'll use a raise application error. So the syntax for this is you need to pass the error code and the error message. This method is basically takes the error code and error message, and always the error code must be between the minus 20,000 to 20,999, not more than that. So remaining all the other error codes are used by your Oracle. You cannot use any other error code other than these values. So basically you can always give the error code as minus 20 to minus 20,999. So that is a maximum, I mean the numbers which you can actually provide. So let's try to look at the a program. Basically now in this program what we are trying to understand is that I'm actually passing the manager number to the employees table, manager number, and I'm trying to delete the employees who are reporting to that manager. Basically I'm trying to delete the employees who are reporting to that manager. In that case, how can you handle this raise application error? So you can handle this in both the sections, either in the execution section or in the exception section. Basically I'm trying to handle in the execution section. So begin, let's say end. So you always have to write the exception, and here you're writing it as when others. Then let's say whenever there is any other error, I want to raise I mean print the error message as, okay, let me just copy paste that. Okay, so whenever there is an error or something, I just want to print the message here. So now let's say I'm trying to delete the employees who are actually associated with 100, or let's say I'm declaring one variable. So which is v underscore manager ID. Let's say this is going to be a number, and I'm initializing this as ampersand manager, which will ask me at the runtime. So here, if I'm trying to delete, so delete from employees, so where, let's say manager ID, so manager ID is equal to v underscore manager ID. So let's say if it doesn't, so we talked about the attributes about the cursor, right? When we discussed in the cursors, we discussed about the percentage found attribute, percentage not found attribute, percentage is open, percentage is open, invalid cursor, and all those attributes. Basically for a cursor and the row count, these are all the different attributes that we talked about. So when you use the percentage found means, that means it found some records. When you use percentage not found means your SQL does not return any record at all. So here I'm going to use that implicit cursor attribute. You can use these attributes for both of them. So basically if you delete the number of records, if the SQL percentage row count is equal to 0, that means it has not deleted any of the records, then I want to write an error message. Basically I want to raise an exception saying that, okay, so there is no manager, there are no employees who are reporting to that manager. So I want to raise that exception. So how do you write it? So this is a method that you use, raise application error. It takes 2 arguments. So I want to write a error message as 20,001. No employees are reporting to this manager. No employees are reporting to this manager. So this is what the error message that I want to print it. So let's see, the row count is nothing but a number of rows returned by the cursor. That will be the row count. I think I've already shown you how it goes. Let's say if your cursor returns 10 records, if you are iterating for a first record, it will give you 1, 2, 3, 4 like that. So let me just try to show this now. Yes, very good, thank you. So no employees are reporting to this manager. Let me just try to get one employee who is not a manager at all. So select star from employees table. I want to get some input on this. I don't think 198 Donald is a manager. So where, let's say employee ID is equal to 198. So 198, okay, this guy is not employee ID, right? Manager ID. So 198. So there, he is not a manager at all. Okay. So if my row count is basically 0, then it has to print or raise an exception saying that. So let me pass an employee ID as 198. Now there is some error. Okay, it's a compilation error. We just have to check here where is the compilation error. Ampersand manager, v manager ID after end. Yes, thank you. So when you try to execute this, let's say the manager is 198, it should throw me the message saying that no employees are reporting to this manager. So it's basically when you try to delete it, 0 rows have been deleted. Whenever the SQL percentage row count is 0, then it is raising the exception saying that no employees are reporting that to manager. See, when do you use the rise application error? It's basically if there is a user defined exception, and if you want to raise the error message in the business message, basically you want to throw the business error message. Let's say I have a user interface, and wherein if an employee resigns the organization, basically they are going to deassociate all the employees who are reporting to that employee, who are reporting to that employee. So basically the business user should come to know, or let's say otherwise, let me give you the very practical example. Okay, let's say you're actually entering the in the Flipkart itself. Let's say when you're buying a product in Amazon or something, you're registering on the Amazon website and you're trying to enter all your details. So basically when you enter the phone number is actually a digit. I mean, it's a numeric number value which you have to print. But for some reason, when you are entering the phone number, you inputted the character. And when you enter the character message and then submit on the registration form, when it goes to the backend and validate, it says that phone number is invalid. Okay, so when you say that phone number is invalid, you should not throw the Oracle error message to the business user. I mean, let's say the customer like us who is actually registering on the Amazon website. So when you see such kind of a business validations, you actually throw to the business user saying that in the Amazon website you'll get the message saying that okay, the number you have entered is invalid, it should be the numeric. That's what you're going to enter. So that way you're going to show the error message or user defined business error message to the user whenever you are performing such kind of a validation. So whenever you want to raise such type of an exceptions, then we go for a rise application error method. So it basically goes to your the user who is actually calling that interface, and they'll come to know that okay, you are actually raising the exception in using this. So this is more about the user defined exception message. In that way you can rise it by using a rise application error method. So implicit cursor attributes, you have two things, I mean four things. One is a row count, percentage found, percentage not found, percentage is open and all. So that you can always use and then rise the user defined exception accordingly. See, this rise application error method, you can use it in the execution block or you can use it in the exception section. So always it can be used anywhere within your program. So that is more about the programs that we are talking about. So probably you start practicing these solutions for PLSQL, and the PLSQL will also talk. Maybe I'll also post some more on our website. All the PLSQL procedures, how can you practice and all those things. Maybe in a week's time, you can also go through that in a blog. That blog you can go through that and then find out. So that's more on the exception part for today. So try to practice it, and in the tomorrow's class we talk about the stored procedures, functions, and also in the PLSQL what we are going to talk about, I'm not going in deep about the PLSQL, what is required for a data warehousing developer or what is required for a Informatica Power Center developer. That's what we are discussing here. So we are going to talk about how to, so far we understand the basics only, how to write a anonymous block, but basically you don't write anonymous block anytime in the real time. You always write the procedure and the function, because your anonymous block will never get stored in the database, right? What is the use of it? So you cannot write this one. So we are going to write the stored procedures and functions and what are all the packages that you write. And next I go with a dynamic SQL. So basically insert, update, delete statement you can write directly inside PLSQL procedures and methods, but you cannot write the DDL statements like a truncate, drop, all those things cannot be used directly in the PLSQL program. So that can be handled by the dynamic SQL. So in the real time in a data warehousing project, you use only the dynamic SQL because we execute only the DDL statements for truncating the tables, for truncating the partitions, for analyzing the tables, for dropping the indexes, for recreating the indexes. We use more dynamic SQL in the data warehousing project, not the static SQL. So static SQL is something that where you know the input already. That is called as a static. Dynamic SQL is something that till the runtime you don't know what has to be performed. That is called as a dynamic SQL. So we'll concentrate more on the dynamic SQL. In the dynamic SQL also, we'll understand how to drop the indexes on a table through the stored procedure, how to drop the indexes, and how to recreate the indexes. Basically, how can I recreate the indexes on the table, and all these things which we do it. So this is more about the more we discuss in the coming classes. And so today is actually Monday according to the Indian time. So 3rd, 4th, and then the 5th. So we have 2 more days for practicing the PLSQL things. And from the 5th is basically we are starting the Informatica Power Center training. That is where we go with complete Informatica Power Center. So from 5th you'll come to know the complete details. All right. So this is about the PLSQL exceptions for now. So try to practice. I'll send you the couple of examples. You can probably practice these examples what we have discussed, and we'll also write few more programs which are related to the exceptions. So always understand what is predefined and what is user defined exception and all those. So that's enough for you to handle all this. Okay. So 2 days we'll discuss about procedures and dynamic SQL and how we are going to handle. Okay. Okay then. So I think we are good here. So let's try to complete, and if possible we'll discuss about the Unix, else we'll discuss the Unix in the clean the part of Power Center training. Okay. See, we are going to send you the username and passwords to you to create the tables on your own. Yes. So we are going to send you the details. It's already been created. It is that we send you that through the mail. We'll send you through the mail because we didn't had a final list of students, and that's the reason we do it. So we'll send you individually to you through the mails. Okay. Thank you. By tomorrow morning you can expect even your Informatica credentials and everything on your everything what you see. Okay. Probably not now, Srinivas. Probably you can give me a call in your morning time.